Welcome to Cisco Tech Beat, the podcast that explores the people and stories behind what inspires the newest innovation. I'm your host, AB, and today I'm thrilled to welcome Matt Caulfield, VP of Identity and Duo, Cisco Security. With an extensive background in both engineering and business, Matt leads the vision and strategy for Cisco's identity portfolio. Matt, welcome to Tech Beat.
Thank you, AB. Very happy to be here.
Awesome. I want to really kick things off by diving into your background because you have a unique perspective, having been someone who was at Cisco, left for a short while, and then came back. So what was that journey like for you?
Yes, absolutely accurate. So I was at Cisco for 10 years. I joined as a entry-level software engineer, working on C-level programming for set-top boxes back when Cisco was still making them. You might remember having like a Cisco cable box.
Totally.
That was a while ago. And since then, worked my way up through Cisco through a bunch of different product teams, working on everything from video to cloud computing, edge computing, networking, virtual networking, a little bit of security. Eventually found myself as a principal engineer running the Boston innovation team in Cambridge, and working on some really cool cutting edge projects like using machine learning and AI to figure out segment routing rules,
right,
or using edge computing to put processing in the edge of service provider networks, or changing how we configure data centers so that it was fully kind of infrastructure as code instead of manual. So all these things were really interesting projects, but then I left. After 10 years, I need to do something new. I'm really excited about some of the technology in virtual networking and edge computing. And so I left to go start a company around that called ORT, which was then, of course, acquired back by Cisco just a year ago in August 2023. And now I'm back in a different role, very different role, but very happy to be back.
That's amazing. And just, did you even imagine that was something that could possibly happen? Or were you really sort of focused on being at ORT and you thought, hey, this is it. This is where we're going?
Yeah, I mean, coming back was not the end goal. And there's a reason why I stayed at Cisco for 10 years. It's a great company and really enjoyed it and the people here. But when I left, I didn't expect to come back, to be honest. It was kind of through a series of decisions and pivots of where we took ORT, the company, to where it was acquired, that it was actually a great fit for Cisco at the time that they picked it back up. So when I left, the thinking was, all right, I'm going to do a startup. Hopefully, at some point in time, we either IPO or that startup gets acquired. Some founders will go out and swing for a single or a double. Some will swing for a home run. Everybody has to shoot for the moon. But in any case, in this case, we did really well and wound up exiting back to Cisco after just 4 years out in the field, which honestly, Cisco's probably one of, if not the best acquirer in the tech space. So really can't complain. I'm happy to be back and in this new role over the past year. But the ORT journey was probably its own conversation. Pretty remarkable. The people that I got to work with, the people I got to meet. Really grateful to have had that experience. And that time away from Cisco was very eye-opening for me in terms of both networking. I probably went from having a small community of people I knew, 300 connections on LinkedIn, to thousands of people I had to interact with as a founder and CEO. So just
Right.
a very formative experience for me as an individual.
Absolutely. And it sounds like the transition back was a comfortable one because of your experience at Cisco. So that makes things a bit easier once getting acquired. You've done so many great things, and I want to hone in a little bit on security, of course. Obviously one of the big pillars for Cisco, among others. But I want to talk about identity-based attacks because we know that they're at an all-time high. And I want to get this right, but according to Cisco Talos, compromised credentials continue to be one of the primary, if not a primary entry point for ransomware attacks, which of course impacts companies of all sizes and individuals. So I guess the question is, why is identity security still so challenging? And what actions do companies need to take now to combat that?
Yeah, why is it so challenging? It's always been challenging. It just changes over time. I think
Right.
originally it was all about how do we rotate passwords, and then how do we add single sign-on, so that you're not having separate passwords for every single application. You have one password and one username that you use for all of your kind of corporate applications. And then it
Sure.
became a problem of, well, we've put all eggs in one basket. We've got one password now. If somebody steals that password, they have access to everything. So we kind of created a single point of failure. And so as an industry, we're like, wait a minute, let's add multi-factor authentication. So you had things like RSA tokens and these kind of multi-digit codes that you could use, which were cumbersome. People lost those things. People would put them in front of webcams and anybody could read them. So
Right.
you ultimately evolved into the same problem that we had with passwords. And then along came multi-factor authentication and things like push-based 2FA with mobile phones, and that made things a bit easier because people generally forget their phone less than they forget a security token because they use their phone for other things. So there's benefit in that. And Duo basically invented that whole space
Right.
of the push-based mobile phone application. And then from there, attackers continue to get more sophisticated. And so, the question is like, why is this so hard? Is like the attackers, for every step that we take as an industry, they're taking a step or two steps. And they always try to stay a step ahead of where the technology is, or at least where the implementation of the technology is.
Right.
So, for example, there are some amazing technologies out there for preventing account takeover, for preventing identity attacks. You could issue everybody in your organization a corporate laptop which has a kind of burned in certificate to it that can't be forged in like a hardware enclave or a secure enclave. You can issue everybody like a cryptographic like YubiKey or another hardware token that they plug in and they have to carry around with them. But not everybody can afford to do all that.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody has the time or the logistics or the resources to do those things. And so what we tend to have is this push and pull between cost and usability on one hand and security on the other. I'd like to think that Duo strikes a very nice balance of security and usability, but it's a separate conversation. But that's why. Like that is why it is so hard to get in front of these identity attacks. Is this constant push and pull between cost, usability, and security.
Absolutely. And I know you mentioned some potential solutions or ways in which we can secure things against some of these cyber criminals who are becoming much more sophisticated and are able to circumvent some of these technologies. You mentioned Duo, which of course is a Cisco product now. Anything else that Duo does to really help the end user keep things a bit more secure? Any other examples or any other kind of technologies that just for anybody listening out there who's not really familiar with what Duo is?
So in my new role now as the VP of Duo and identity for Cisco, Duo is very much my world. And it's kind of amazing how much it does, to be honest. There's so many corner cases in authentication, so many use cases, like not just employees logging in from their corporate laptop. You've got contractors, you've got third parties, vendors, the long tail of non-employee users, and then even non-human users. You have things like service accounts, machine accounts, and things like that. There's all these use cases, even beyond single sign-on, like Windows login, for example. These are all little niches and use cases within it. Duo does a remarkable job getting coverage across the full gamut of use cases. So you can have really gnarly environments where Duo does quite well.
Right.
It's built in a way where it can deal with like the many different variations of authentication. That's one thing, but I think what really sets us apart and why customers tend to buy Duo over other solutions in the market tends to be the user experience, both for the admin who has to set it up, as well as for the end user. And so the tools that we provide are really, the basic thing is push-based MFA. You have an app on your phone, you get a push notification, you press allow, it's fine. Of course, that mechanism has been under attack. As you were talking about the Talos report, you spam somebody enough with a push notification, eventually they're going to relent and press the allow button.
Right.
That's just human nature. And even it doesn't take a bunch of them. Like some people are just conditioned to press allow anytime they see that prompt.
That's right.
No matter where it came from or what time of day it was. It's just like, yeah, I'm just trying to get on with my day and press allow and keep moving. So that's become a problem. So the industry has evolved to things like verified push, or number matching, so that you have to do a little bit of work to kind of compare what's on your computer with what's on your phone to make sure you're really in front of it.
Right.
That's not the best, because you can still trick somebody. If you're an attacker, you can still call them up and say, "Hey, you're going to receive a notification on your phone. If you could just read me back the numbers, and I'll tell you which one to push or what number to put in." Like,
Right.
there are ways around that with social engineering. The thing that Duo does really well is, some of this phishing resistant MFA, which is, even if you have an attacker trying to phish you, whether it's over email or calling you up, um, tying your identity to your device. So we have a feature called trusted endpoints, where you can trust the device and embed an identity with the device, and use that in combination with your identity, your personal identity. And we can use things like biometrics, like fingerprint or Face ID.
Hmm.
That's one of the strongest ways to get to secure authentication today, and something that Duo does out of the box pretty much.
Yeah, I love it. And of course, as a Cisconian, I use a bunch of those technologies every day, which I'm happy for. I'm glad that they want to make sure it's me and not someone else who's trying to be me, although I don't know who that would be. I want to stick with the MFA theme for a second, because I've heard certain cyber experts talk about something called the next wave or the second wave of MFA. Is that a real thing? Is that something that is part of what you just covered, or what is it, if it does exist?
Yeah, and it plays into what I was just talking about, which is, first wave of MFA is just getting to the point where you've got like SMS codes on your phone, or telephony, you get a phone call or a push notification. It's kind of basic
Right.
MFA. All of those mechanisms now are frankly outdated. They can all be either intercepted directly. There are ways to easily socially engineer around them without a lot of effort. That's kind of the first wave of MFA. And most companies that we talk to, they're still there. They're still using those first wave technologies. Saw an industry report recently from one of our competitors that like only 6% of their customers actually adopt the second wave MFA
Oh, wow.
capabilities. And when I see, think second wave, it's really based on biometrics. So things like fingerprint or Face ID. Not many people have like a retina scanner in their office, but
Yeah.
like that's another example of what you
Right.
could do if you had it, and in some work environments you do.
Right.
Things like that. Plus the ability to tie it to the device, so device-based trust. Plus industry standards like FIDO2 to make sure that the chain of trust between the device or whatever the authenticator is and the backend is as rock solid as possible. So making it cryptographically secure.
Right.
That combination of things, plus the ability to then provide ongoing monitoring of it, is really what we think of as second wave MFA. It's kind of device based, biometric based, cryptographically secure authentication with really strong controls around it to provide continuous monitoring and threat detection and response.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Yeah, and of course, every year we up our technology and keep with the times and try to stay ahead of those who are trying to bypass what we provide. I want to piggyback on something that you mentioned earlier, and you made a great point about how our technology doesn't just affect people who work at Cisco, but of course, ultimately the end user. So this is more of a customer-based question, but obviously across our platform, we are always striving to deliver the best customer experiences possible. So just in your professional opinion and experience, what are some of the challenges or the biggest challenges that we're helping our customers with when it comes to stuff like securing identity, for example?
Yes, it's a great question. So you mentioned how we use Duo internally at Cisco. We do. So within the security business group, which is what Duo is part of, we think of Cisco IT as kind of customer zero. It's the one that we start with, that we make sure is successful. Because if we can, whatever it is, eat your own dog food, drink your own champagne, pick your poison.
Right.
It's important that we're using the products that we're building in a way to maximize their efficacy, and also to create a very tight feedback loop, which me as a product manager, I really appreciate. Like, it's rare to get
Sure.
that kind of collaboration with customers. There's some rare instances where you have design partners. So Cisco IT is that for us, customer zero, where they're very much providing feedback continuously about what
Right.
we're doing. And then customers in the industry, for where we're at, um, they're slowly getting to these more advanced forms of authentication. So, like, what are some of the things that we're seeing in the field is like they're worried about, um, first of all, identity threats overall. It's like, I'm worried about identity threats while not harming the productivity and the usability for my end users. So it's that balance. So they're trying to figure out, how do I strike a balance between security and usability slash productivity? And that's what keeps them up at night. And cost.
Right.
Those are kind of the three factors that go into it. And so, think about the types of attacks we're seeing. There's really two main buckets in identity. There's what's called session hijacking, and then there's account takeover. At least that's how I bucket them. Session hijacking is when somebody's already signed in and you've already gone through the whole rigmarole of like putting in your username, your password, doing the thing on your phone, scanning your fingerprint, whatever. And then you've got a session with the applications that you're using. Say you were trying to log into, Workday or Salesforce or GitHub or, whatever it is, WebEx, whatever it is. Once you go through that whole single sign-on flow and that MFA flow, then there's some kind of token that is traded between the application and the identity provider. And that token is something that can be stolen. And certain applications do a better job than others of protecting that token and noticing when it's been stolen. Like that session hijacking is probably one of the biggest things. So if a attacker, for example, gets malware on your laptop, and they can go read your browser memory and pull the cookies out of it and find your session tokens for, let's say, Outlook or Microsoft, and find your session tokens for Salesforce. They can just grab those and then pretend to be you without even having to fake out your username, password, or your MFA or any of that. They've just stolen that session token, which is kind of implicit trust almost between the application and the end user. So that's one way. And then the other way is what I was describing previously, which are these social engineering-based attacks. Somebody can grab your username and password. Many people will reuse their work password or their personal password for work, either way. Some people will have a personal
Right.
password that they use for everything, and then they'll go ahead and just use that for their work password, or vice versa. So therefore, when some random website that you used 7 years ago gets breached, and they download the whole database of usernames and passwords, well, there's your name and your username or email address, and there's your password. And so now the attackers know that, okay, Matt typically uses Cisco 123 as his password across all these services. I'm just going to try to log in as Matt with Cisco 123 everywhere
Right.
and see if it works.
Right.
That's an attack called credential stuffing, because you're kind of stuffing in the same credential everywhere. Similarly, you've got things like password spraying, where you're taking not a specific password that's Matt is known to use, but you're taking a long list of well-known passwords that people tend to use. Like password one is like a very common password for people to use.
Oh, wow.
You'd be surprised. In any case, you can assume that it's easy to guess or to find out what someone's username and password is. And so then, you're relying on the MFA. But like I was saying earlier, you have all these kind of social engineering ways now to get past MFA. There's a long list of ways to do MFA bypass these days, where that's eventually going to lead to account takeover. And once I can log in as you think, go back to the customer. What is the customer worried about? They're worried about an attacker logging into the account of one of their employees or one of their contractors, or doing session hijacking with one of their employees or one of their contractors, because it doesn't matter for them if it's the software engineer who has access to a production database. It doesn't matter if it's the CFO who has access to like the next kind of quarterly earnings report, or if it's the janitor who has access to all the building systems. Like each of those is an attractive target for its own reason. Or even if it's somebody who doesn't have any access at all and they just have an email address in the company, that is the first step in. Once you have access to and can send emails on the behalf of somebody who's already in the company, you create this kind of implicit trust. It's like, oh, I got an email from somebody who works at the same company as me. The attacker can jump laterally between people in the same way they could jump laterally kind of on the network, kind of between servers.
Right.
Almost. So it's this is what's keeping, back to your question, is like, what are the customers worried about? This is what they're worried about. They're worried about these human identity based attacks, about session hijacking. And I could go on forever, but there's a whole bunch of things that we can do about it, and I'm happy to talk about that as well. But yeah, it's a bit of a problem. It's a huge problem right now. 80% plus of attacks involve this kind of human element of social engineering, account takeover, session hijacking, and so on.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought up social engineering, because I think a lot of people are under the sort of the misconception that when somebody hacks something, it's always this really sophisticated, overly programmed malware that has to do. I mean, and social engineering can be something like just not using tech at all, but like talking to somebody and getting them to give you a password, right? And that happens a lot. It sounds like it happens a lot more often than people would give that, would imagine. So I think it's a really important thing. And some of my other guests in the past have talked about social engineering as well. Like, it doesn't take much for a very sophisticated person to get someone to talk and share details.
No, this has been going on for millennia. It's like you've had con men since like the beginning of time who can kind of talk their way through a situation. It's no different. It's just it's over the internet instead of in person, or over the phone. It's the same thing. Like people are conditioned to be helpful, and that's not a bad thing.
Sure.
And we don't want that to change in society. So we need to do
Right.
things in technology that allow us to preserve that kind of implicit trust people have in other people and their willingness to step out and help each other. Because if
Right.
somebody calls you up and they say, "Hey, I'm from the IT department at Cisco or whatever your employer is," and say, "Hey, we're doing some testing. You're going to receive like a 6-digit code. If you could just read that back to me, we're just trying to get this done." It's like you want to be helpful. Of
Right.
course, in that situation, you should never respond to that. Doesn't matter what number it came from. Never read those codes over the
Right.
phone. But it's human nature to want to connect with people, to be helpful
Sure.
with them, and to help them out. So I think, especially if you're more gullible than others, like you might be a prime target. So these are the types of things that we worry about with social engineering. Is it's kind of human nature to be
Right.
susceptible to social engineering, and it's so much easier now. I don't need to. First of all, you're right. Like I don't need to find like a 0-day exploit in Windows or some router firmware anymore. I can just simply go after the credentials and the identity of the people. Why hack in when you can log in? Um,
Right.
Instead, and I don't even need to go and try to find people through calling up the main number for the company and working through the directory tree. All I need to do is open up my laptop, go to linkedin.com, and then I get a full list of all the people in the organization who are part of the IT department, all the people who are part of sales, who are part of engineering. I can run those queries easily, and then I can see,
Right.
hey, in the other people in the IT department, who has like a Microsoft certification, who has Microsoft Entra or Azure AD certification or an Active Directory certification. Those are your identity people. You can even get
Right.
so far into like which ones are in the help desk. So you can really map out the organization and gather intelligence to figure out exactly who to target. So it's not just phishing; it's really like spear phishing with social engineering on top of it, and that combination of things plus AI, where it's like I'm just going to sound like somebody who works at this company. Like it's
Right.
amazing what the attackers can do in order to go after people. And my view is like there's only so much security awareness training you can do. At some point, like it's so hard to discern like what's real or not as when somebody reaches out to you as an employee that you need the technology to pick up the slack. You need the technology to be there to help make sure that you're building trust into these systems, that for example that email is from a trusted sender, to make sure that that link that you got isn't actually a phishing link. There's so much slack that technology can and should pick up so that we every day don't need to walk around being paranoid 24/7.
Absolutely, and this is like a perfect segue. We didn't plan this, people, because you mentioned technology. You mentioned AI, which of course is the catchphrase of 2024 and beyond. I'm sure, but I do want to talk about AI in the context of identity security, because obviously at Cisco, we look at AI as a way to really make our systems more robust. We don't sort of dwell on the negatives of AI, as people call them, but more like how can we use this technology to really help generate better software, better platforms, better enterprise solutions. So this is sort of a crystal ball question, but as you look ahead to the future, is there anything that excites you about the use of AI in terms of identity security?
Yeah, I think it's both ends of the spectrum. There are things about AI that excite me and things that terrify me. I think we talk about um, we talk about AI for security, security for AI, but there's also AI for attackers, and I think that in and of itself amplifies their ability to do successful social engineering, especially over email. But you even see things like attackers using deep fakes in meetings to fool people into thinking, hey, this person joined the Zoom meeting is really who they say they are, but they're actually using a deep fake and they're a totally different person. And then they're wiring money around, and like it gets out of hand pretty quickly. I'm not
Right.
going to harp on that. Like you said, Cisco has a very forward-looking view on the potential of AI and its transformative power in the industry. And I share that view. I think I've seen what this can do. I've looked at how these things work, and it's really remarkable what LLMs are capable of. But even before that, some of the things we were doing in the machine learning land for a long time with statistical models and things like that. Um, AI has unlocked our ability to identify identity threats. So, looking at the logs and information about who is logging in and when and from what device, we can find patterns of anomalies. Like, that's basic stuff these days. It used to be very cutting edge, but like that is still very much important. Using AI in order to detect more and more sophisticated identity threats and to identify which users have the highest risk. That model of deciding which factors to weight and how is a very classic like neural network type problem.
Uh-huh.
So cool. But even beyond that, the things that we can do with AI from a generative AI perspective to make it easier for our customers to interact with our products, and for example, easily understand why somebody can't log in. Imagine a help desk person gets a call, and oftentimes like I can't log into my account. It's like, why? So do they need to escalate that ticket and go to 5 different systems and figure it out? Or can they just go to a prompt and say, hey, Matt can't log into his account. Can you help me figure out why? And then rely on the power of generative AI and its ability to look across systems to figure out, all right, Matt is trying to log into an application that's not on, the corporate network, or that he doesn't have access to, or that he doesn't have permissions for. So Matt can't access Salesforce because he's not in sales. Bam. All right. Next problem, we can move on quickly. So it's really from a query perspective, from an information perspective, especially for help desk, but also for admins who get those types of questions, can significantly speed up the amount of time they need to spend on very routine things like researching and investigating either identity threats or identity problems or troubleshooting identity problems. And then from a more proactive perspective, there's a ton that we can do in order to simplify how these systems are set up. So rather than going to a million different, page configuration pages, instead say, hey, I want to set up this organization so that every employee is required to have phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication with device-based trust. Please propose a policy that makes that true. And for contractors, make sure that they all, require, let's say, Duo verified push for that. And create policy based on that type of information is just like remarkably more efficient than having to go and first of all learn the whole product and then figure out what you need to
Uh-huh.
configure and then figure out that you've done it the right way. It's just really cool that you can, as a admin, go and have these more efficient ways to interact with products that you're probably in every day. And maybe over time, it'll be more efficient for you just to press the buttons yourself. But especially if you're new to some of these products, and Cisco's constantly shipping new products, which is exciting, to be frank, in the security space. Even if you're new to them, you can get started with them right away. So I see those capabilities for Gen AI as being fairly compelling. And then I think there's maybe a time in the future where even for end users, the ability to first of all do security awareness training for them and to provide interaction so they don't need to go to help desk. They can just say, I can't sign into my account. Can you help me figure it out? And you can virtually figure these things out, or get them to a point where Gen AI is being used to advise the admin on how to make their organization more secure over time. These are all interesting futuristic use cases that aren't that far in the future, to be honest, based on the technology that we have today.
Yeah, I love that. And really, it's about simplified experiences because, as the technology gets more complex, it's going to be harder for someone who's not as versed in certain technical abilities to be able to figure things out. But having an end user be able to be like, oh, let me just use this prompt or this AI, bot or whatever. Maybe bot's not the right word. I'm not really that schooled in this, but let me use this resource and get my question answered, and now I can move on and do the things I want to do. So I think that's great, and I agree with you. I think AI has a lot of positive use cases, particularly within our realm here at Cisco and in tech in general. I want to move away from work. Yahoo! And really talk about life outside of work really quickly. When you're not busy doing all the things that you do in your role, what are some of the activities and or hobbies that you are involved in that bring you joy outside the workplace?
Yeah, it's a good question. Feels like I'm very busy these days. But no, outside of work, I live on 4 acres of land outside of Boston, kind of in the middle of the woods, which is nice.
Nice.
My family and I like having that a little bit of isolation to get away from things. We're right connected to a whole bunch of hiking trails, which this time of year, as we're recording this, I guess it's autumn in New England, and hopefully, when once it's released, it'll also be autumn in New England. But it's probably the best time of year to be in the Northeast area. So, leaves are falling. The air has this kind of smell to it, and so having the opportunity to just walk out my front door and go for a 4 mile hike in the woods is a real blessing. So that's definitely a big piece of it, is just communing with nature a little bit. It helps ground me. A lot of
Absolutely.
my day is technology. I grew up like camping and backpacking, and just getting back to that every now and then is really nice. Other than that, I've got 2 kids, Charlie and Ada, 12 and 10. Spending a lot of time with them. They're at an age now where they still want to hang out, which I appreciate. So we watch movies together, we go outside together, we go places together. We like to vacation, all those things, and then spending time with my wife Maren, all the things that we do. So family time, hiking, outdoor time, and I think the third thing is probably cooking. Really enjoy. Although I'm not very good at it, really enjoy just like spending a Sunday afternoon making a meal. And like for me, like that's a good use of time. And just at the end of it, being able to enjoy it with a bunch of people brings me a lot of joy.
I love that. I can relate to every single thing you said. Across the board, having gone to college in New England, I love New England fall. And of course, your kids 12 and 10, this is the perfect time for them to roll around in leaves. I'm sure 4 acres, you've probably got a lot of leaves if you have trees around you. So being able to play in the leaves.
We just made this giant leaf pile over the weekend. My leaf blower, I ran out of gas. My daughter was like, not bothered by that. She was like, let's get the rakes. So
Yeah,
we,
right.
we made this huge leaf pile just off the driveway.
That's great. I love that. Well, Matt, I think that's a perfect time to bring this to a close. I want to thank you really for joining the show this morning and sharing your thought leadership on identity security, the sort of the future and use of AI and everything else. And I hope at some point we get to talk again, maybe even in person.
Yeah, thank you very much, AB. Happy to be here. Nice chatting with you.
Great. Talk to you soon.